fiber is really good for you, right? And it's been proven to prevent cardiovascular disease, right? Well, I'm not so sure. So this came up in a discussion recently on my on the channel. I did a video on that discussion and have started to get deeper in terms of the science itself. So this is the second in that series, and let's take a look. So this was a quote landmark end quote article. I reported on that article again in the last video when I talked about the discussion on the page. One thing I forgot to mention was the affiliations of the research group. University of Kentucky, VA Medical Center, actually in Lexington, Kentucky. That's my hometown now, and proud to hear that. Chicago Center for Clinical Research, Oxnard, New Orleans, a couple of places sound pretty good. But go on down. College of Physicians and Surgeons, Columbia, New York, Proctor Gamble Company in Cincinnati. Again, I forgot to mention that. As you start looking at the other researchers as well, Proctor and Gamble, a lot of the same places. It looks like these researchers had evidently followed each other or were in a team that was working in multiple sites, again, including Proctor and Gamble. Now, that's a problem. But as I mentioned in that other video, the research was excellent. It was a randomized clinical trial. They put people on an American Heart Association diet. Now, again, that was current as of 2000, 20 years ago when it was done. And they were looking at the science that was also current as of that time, that total cholesterol and LDL, bad cholesterol. It clearly did drop, total and bad cholesterol. So I think we can say that I think that's good evidence, and I think there's plenty of other good evidence that fiber, and the fiber used in this one was psyllium fiber. Psyllium husk probably does decrease total cholesterol and bad cholesterol. Here's one of my concerns, though. The new science is not is indicating, and I think fairly clearly so, that LDL and cholesterol is not a big deal in terms of heart attack and stroke. It is for some people, but those people are not that common. There may have been one, and probably wasn't anybody with familial hypercholesterolemia in that study. There were a group of people that had high cholesterol, but again, not that high, at least that I could see. Now, another thing I didn't cover was the money aspect of this. Like I said, I didn't mention that Procter & Gamble was involved somehow in that study, and I think we all have our suspicions on how. There had already been a significant back and forth and focus in terms of money and cereals. General Mills, 10 years before that, 1990, had dropped a cereal, a breakfast cereal that had high fiber. They called it Benefit, and it had psyllium fiber in it. In fact, as you begin to look at this, it was either Procter and Gamble or General Mills, the two elephants in this market that are battling back and forth. I think it was Procter and Gamble actually petitioned the FDA to investigate the cereal that the General Mills was making, and I believe that might have been Fiber One. And the point behind it was because it had psyllium fiber, and again, it may not have been this one, but the two giants in the market are arguing back and forth. And one of them is claiming that the FDA needs to go after and investigate the cereal of the other competitor. Why? Because it had psyllium. Again, so why? And the answer was, well, they said psyllium should be investigated as a drug. So I don't know where that litigation, if there was litigated. I don't know where all that went. That's not really my focus. My focus is looking at the real science and what it does say about dietary fiber and cardiovascular disease. Now, you start going into Google Scholar, and this is one of the first ones that comes up. Another one that comes up is a couple of meta-analyses or lit reviews come up. What do I mean by meta-analyses? Meta means looking at a bunch of them and trying to put them together. So a meta-analysis is a scientific thing. The Cochrane, Cochrane group is now part of Wikipedia, and they are a global, very respected and excellent scientific community that specializes in how can we put studies together, the multiple studies in science together, and investigate whether they actually what do they all have to say about the same components of science. So there's been several meta-analyses done about this specific topic. Psyllium fiber or other fiber, dietary fiber, and cardiovascular disease. As I mentioned, I found two of them quickly. I had not heard of either of those journals. One of the journals was a Journal of Nurse Practitioners. The other one, this journal in Elsevier, is the Journal of Chiropractic Medicine. And obviously, neither one of these are New England Journal. I've done a video in the past on how to understand the scientific impact and oomph of a journal. Obviously, again, neither one of these is world leading. And as I started to look at this, I saw the title, Dietary Fiber, Prevention of Cardiovascular Disease. That was good. Then an umbrella review of meta-analyses. And I had never heard the term umbrella review. So I started to smell a rat in terms of true evidence-based techniques. But as I continued to read, they sounded pretty good. I decided to look up umbrella analyses. And sure enough, it is a term. It's not a term that I had heard of. If you go into the web and start looking for Cochrane umbrella analyses, some interesting things come up. This is one of those scientific presentations that the deck is often shared and put out there on the internet. Again, you have to approach it with your own skepticism to decide, is this good science? As I reviewed this deck, it did appear that it was good science, and they did start talking about Cochrane overviews, and they did seem to know what they were talking about. They began to make me feel like, you know what, maybe there is a term umbrella review within the overview category. And I'm just going to cover a couple of their slides because, again, they do make sense. Why do we need overviews? A single Cochrane review will rarely address all of the potential interventions for a given condition, and decision makers may have difficulty finding and comparing all of the relevant Cochrane reviews. That is actually absolutely true. But now, when do they go into the discussion of an umbrella review? Again, it's a term that I haven't seen before. Again, these people know where to look. They know that they know about Cochrane. They know what's going on there. And again, they do start looking at referencing and using the term umbrella review. So here's what I did. Again, for those of you who are not as nerdly as me, pardon me if this is going into an area that you have no concern about. Most of the viewers of this channel, though, do have concerns about this specific issue, the scientific rigor behind the concepts and perceptions that we see pushed on the internet. And sometimes it becomes one bunny trail following off of another, following off of another. So to get back to the overall, the question is, does does fiber actually protect us? Dietary fiber, does it protect us in terms of heart attack and stroke? Um, we've seen one study which may have been good, but it's 20 years old, and the science has definitely changed. Now we start looking at other studies. There are clear studies. The one I just referenced was published in 2017. But it's talking about a term that I've not heard of, and but it's still a very, very appropriate, scientifically rigorous group, the Cochrane Methods group. So now I'm going into the Cochrane Methods group and starting to look at, do they actually use a term, umbrella study? So I looked up multiple interventions group under Cochrane Methods. Then I went into, again, deeper focus in that area, looking at multiple interventions within the Cochrane study group. I went into, they actually have a, what do you call it? Another senior moment. A glossary. Is it a glossary? Glossary of terms. Anyway, I looked under their glossary of terms for umbrella. And I do not see, it's clearly not a sanctioned term for what they do. It's clearly not in their glossary. But again, I will say the article, I don't thump them too hard. I don't thump this group too hard for using the term umbrella review. And again, as I continue to look through the article itself, it does appear to be fairly rigorous. Now, back to the article. After going through all of that bunny trail of is an umbrella review actually a real thing? Again, I don't think it's a sanctioned term, but review of multiple reviews is a clear term and a use within the Cochrane group. Now let's go back and look at the study itself. They looked for meta-analyses. An umbrella review of all published meta-analyses was performed January 1980 to January 31, 2017. And here's the strategy they used. Fiber or glucan or psyllium or fructans, and meta-analysis or systematic review. Only English language publications provided statistical analysis on cardiovascular disease, lipid concentrations, or blood pressure were reviewed or retrieved. Again, so even though they're looking just as of a year or two ago, they're still looking at lipid concentrations, blood pressure, but they are looking at cardiovascular disease. So even if we think that lipid concentrations may not be a big deal, with some exceptions, blood pressure and clearly cardiovascular disease are. So in terms of results, they looked at they found 31 meta-analyses. And the meta-analyses comparing highest versus lowest dietary fiber intake reported statistically significant reductions in the relative risk of cardiovascular disease mortality, coronary heart disease, and stroke. Now, what were the relative risk factors? 0.72 to 0.91, 0.76 to 0.93, and 0.83 to 0.93. So what does that mean? Well, again, just as a reminder, if that range crosses over 1, then you can interpret that as it might just be a random thing. None of them crossed over 1. So there is clearly evidence here, at least by this study, and it does appear to be a good study, and it does look at major chunks of the science in this area. Well, let's go to their conclusion, and then we'll get a little bit deeper. The conclusion is the review suggests individuals consuming highest amounts of dietary fiber can significantly reduce their incidence and mortality from cardiovascular disease. Then they go into their guesses on why, which I don't really care about that much. And I'll give you the links on these things so you can look for yourself. intro, at least in the United States. Well, let's not. They're going down that cholesterol path. Dietary fiber has been reported to be beneficial, believed to be something that may decrease the cardiovascular epidemic. I thought there was something good in this intro part, but maybe not. I will say this. I thought this might have covered that, but I've seen it somewhere else, and I've seen it in multiple places, and I do believe it's true. The average, well, let me put it this way. They've looked at the recommendations in terms of dietary fiber and the actual, what Americans actually do, and it's probably 5 to 15% of adults actually get the recommended amount of fiber. Another component about that is, you may say, like I used to think, well, I eat a lot of salads, so therefore I get a lot of fiber. Well, lettuce really doesn't have that much fiber. We can talk later about what actually does have fiber. I currently use a supplement, psyllium, which I've mentioned before. Actually, I use this. I get that on Amazon. I put it in tea every day and drink it, and it's nasty. John had a couple of recommendations. Diet Doctor, he said, has a good article on the low carb vegetables, the vegetables to use, and he recommends this supplement, the Yerba Prima daily fiber component. Let's go back to this meta-analysis, this quote umbrella analysis. I'm not going to go into every one of these articles. I will make a comment about how they identified them. Originally, they found 516 articles. Articles that were excluded due to not being relevant, 472. Review articles, 7, and editorials, 5. So they dropped all of those. And they were left with potential meta-analyses of 32. And then one of them was excluded because it was not published in English. So they ended up, out of 500 and something, only 31 meeting the criteria. Now, a lot of people could say, well, that's good or that's bad because they took out most of the science. I think that's good because they were very clear in their criteria that these had to be statistically analyzed. They had to show their statistics. They had to state that they were meta-analyses. They had to be meta-analyses, and they had to focus on this topic. So, again, I think it's a good thing. I'm also surprised that they found that many, 31. I did want to go, I don't want to go through the data tables, but I did want to reference a couple of other things real quick, if I can find them. And it basically has to do with a couple of the articles themselves. And I also wanted to mention this diagram real quick. Now, this is a diagram for proposed mechanisms underlying the observed association. Again, as I've discussed many times before, the most common assumptions in the past have been reduced cholesterol and fatty acid absorption. I won't say that's not a mechanism. I won't say that any of these are not mechanisms and that reduced LDL cholesterol is not a mechanism. But as I've said before, I'm suspicious just because of what we now know about the relative importance of LDL. Now, here I think may actually be more of the issue, and that is reduced glucose absorption and decreased insulin secretion. Significant fiber in the diet is seen as decreasing, slowing down. It decreases the glycemic index of food. So that very well may be an issue. Now, their mechanism is that reduces the blood pressure. No, it doesn't. It decreases the insulin response. It decreases the swings in glucose. And again, if you begin to remember that cardiovascular inflammation is the number one cause of heart attack and stroke, and by far the number one cause of cardiovascular inflammation is swings in blood sugar and insulin, then that begins to make sense. There's also another item that I would mention, and that is the gut biome. I've reported a few times on the change in gut biome. If you they've done several studies which are very interesting. I'll see if I can find those studies and put those in the comments below. Studies where they actually took people that had significant insulin resistance or even diabetes. They wiped out the gut biome of lab animals and did a fecal transplant of the feces from people that had insulin resistance and diabetes. I know that sounds ooky, but hear the rest of this. The animals then developed insulin resistance. So there does, and this was a randomized clinical trial type of approach, so very, very good science. There does appear to be some gut biome issues here. And I don't think they mentioned that, other than to say maybe the gut biome has something to do with cholesterol. I think there may be gut biome issues here, but maybe, again, more an issue around insulin resistance. If you've made it this far, I'm going to give you a break and not go into further detail on these studies. There are a couple of studies that were mentioned here that I thought were promising in terms of looking deeper at this issue. I hope to cover those in future videos on this topic. And again, if you've made it this far, thank you so much for your interest.